Hey everyone, my name is Austin and welcome to my AutoCAD tutorial. This tutorial series will cover the absolute basics of 2D drafting and how to get started right away in AutoCAD. I'll be using AutoCAD Map 3D 2019 because that's what I have, but what I'm going to teach you should be applicable to pretty much every version since about 2013. If you don't already have AutoCAD installed, it's super easy to do. Just make your way to the Autodesk website, follow the instructions there. And like I said, I'm using the Map 3D toolset, but you're welcome to use whatever toolset you'd like. Some quick background on me. I've got about half a decade of professional experience using AutoCAD. I've taught dozens of people, many of whom have gone on to have successful careers as drafters, designers, some engineers. And I've served as the drafting department manager for a big multi-million-dollar international company where I did training, developed drafting standards, templates, back-end custom commands, things of that nature. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get on to the tutorial. So first things first, you're going to notice that my AutoCAD probably looks a little bit different from yours. One of the first things you should know is that the software is highly customizable. The way my screen is set up is just one way to do things, though I do find it to be preferable to some of the more cluttered setups. The first thing I like to change are the crosshair and background colors. I think they start off as like gray and white, which is not very conducive to having a good time. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and type settings and just hit enter or space. One thing to know about AutoCAD is in the vast majority of circumstances, space and enter are going to do the exact same thing. And when they don't, I'll let you know at that time. So in our settings menu, we want to go ahead and navigate over to this drafting tab here. And underneath the auto snap settings, and I'm not really sure why it's situated here of all places, but we're going to press the colors button. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff here, a whole bunch of stuff in this context menu. We'll cover that at a later date. For now, what we care about are two things: the uniform background color and the crosshairs color. For me, I like to make my uniform background black, and I like to make my crosshairs red. Just keep it simple. I find that it helps to, sort of make things pop out a little more. When you're done with that, go ahead and hit apply and close. I'm going to just hit cancel. Don't want to change anything here. And then just hit OK on your settings. Okay, next up, we're going to add our properties window on the side here, like I've got. So I'll go ahead and close mine. And in order to do that, we're going to type in the alias MO. This is sort of I'm not really sure what the history of this is, but it's kind of an old school command. MO will bring up the properties menu. For you guys, it'll probably be out here like this. In order to move it, you want to grab the sort of darkened part of it here on the end. And I like to dock it on the left side here. In regards to the MO command or alias to bring this up, I like to think of properties as having Mo information. So, so that's how I remember that the properties window is MO. Yeah, and there's a lot of information here. We're going to go through some of this later on in this series and kind of go through a lot of this stuff. But for now, it's just good to practice having this docked over here. Next up, you'll probably notice that my command line looks a little different from yours. That's this section down here. The command line by default looks something like this, just sort of hanging out at the bottom here. All I typically do is grab these dots and then simply pull it to the bottom. And I generally like to make sure that this little window here is popped up to about 3 lines. That way I can just see some of the more recent commands that I've done. Okay, once again, the command line is not extraordinarily relevant right this second, but it will become more important as we move on. One thing I want to point out about the command line is that everything you do in AutoCAD is reflected in this command line. So For example, if I invoke the line command here by pressing L space, you can see down on my command line, that's all reflected. So I have the command L, I invoked it to get the line command, and now it's telling me to do something down here in the white section where it says specify the first point. So I'm going to do that. Once I specify the first point, you can see I now sort of have this not yet drawn but imaginary line waiting for additional input. Obviously, to make a line, we need 2 points in space, right? And it's sort of giving me a representation visually of where that'll be. If we look down in our command line here, you can see it's telling me exactly what to do, saying specify the next point. So I'm going to do just that, specify the next point. And if we were to continue on like this, we could go ahead and create a whole bunch of little lines here. And we could just follow the command line and its instructions. One other portion of the command line you're going to notice is this highlighted undo. So this undo command, or I should say subroutine within the command, it does exactly what you would think it would do. If I activate the undo subroutine in this particular command, it's going to undo the last thing we just did. So I can activate it in one of a couple ways. I can either click on it and it will undo, or if we look here, you can see that the U is capitalized and highlighted in blue. So if I press U space, you can see that it will execute the undo subroutine inside of AutoCAD. So once again, if I hit U space, it will undo. And in fact, I can do that even here on my first point if I want to choose a new starting point. It's important whenever, especially if you're using a new command you haven't used before, or really when you're new in general, to be referencing this command line fairly frequently. I've had students tell me, hey, there was something in a CAD evaluation that you didn't necessarily teach me about, but I used the command and I looked at the command line, and the command line explained exactly how to do it. I was able to intuit how to successfully execute the command, which, bad on me for not having the foresight to teach them the specific command that they needed. But it's important to be self-sufficient, because you're not always going to have somebody, holding your hand and teaching you every little thing you might need. And AutoCAD is a very extensive program. So main thing is, especially when you're using a new command, you want to be looking at your command line. Okay, so we do have a handful of other sort of housekeeping items that we need to get to before we begin in earnest. So most of you might have a grid in the background. You can get rid of this grid simply by pressing F7 on your keyboard. Another useful function command is going to be F8, and that's going to activate ortho mode. So what ortho mode does is essentially it locks the input of your commands. In this case, we'll use the line command again. It locks the input to your X and Y axes, which, without getting too much into it, is sort of a more complicated way of saying that it's how you draw a straight line, either left and right or up and down. You can see as I sort of hit the quadrants of, where this input would be, it snaps directly to, ortho up, ortho down, left and right, etc. Another F key you'll want to be fairly familiar with is going to be the F3 key. So I'm going to go ahead and press that now. So F3 is going to pull up my automatic OSnap settings. So these settings they're important to understand, and unfortunately they're a little bit complicated to wrap your head around when you first start doing this program. But essentially, for the time being, I'm going to turn all these off, including my snap tracking, my object snap in general. I like to hit clear all. You don't really have to, but I like to, and I'm going to hit OK. Now, it's important to make the distinction that when it comes to snapping in AutoCAD, you're going to be snapping 95 if not 99% of the time that you're working, you're going to be snapping to something. Um, However, I personally like to set my AutoCAD up in a way that allows me to control exactly when I want to snap. And if I have those automatic snaps on, they sort of get in the way. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Um, so with that O snap off, I want to sort of draw your attention down here to the bottom right. And you can see on this little menu, we have some buttons that light up, and I can actually hover over these buttons. For example, this is the ortho mode button. We have a grid display button over here. We have a grid snap button over here. And you can see the associated function key for each of these, for a lot of these things. Now, I'm not going to go over every single one of these. There are, and just in this menu alone, there is a wealth of information. The main thing is you can sort of see just at a glance, hey, do I have ortho mode activated? You know, F8 for ortho mode, F7 for your grid. I mean, obviously you can see your grid in the background. But just things like that, right? Do I have my O snaps on, etc. Okay. One more thing in this hefty preamble here. If you're using a newer version of AutoCAD, like I think it's around 2018 or newer, you're going to have this thing called Intelligent Update enabled by default. And what Intelligent Update does is it sort of limits AutoCAD's effective frame rate to sort of eliminate overhead on your PC. So it may not come across well in the video, but you can see if I activate my line command and I sort of, spin it around, it's updating fairly frequently. It looks pretty smooth, right? And that's because I have my intelligent update set to 60 frames per second. By default, it's set to 20, which to me looks a little choppy. I have a 144 hertz refresh rate monitor, so it doesn't really look super great for me. In order to change that, if you would like to, all we've got to do is type Intel, and it will auto-complete the rest of the command for us. I'll hit enter, and you can enter a new value here for the number of frames that AutoCAD should be outputting. So for me, like I said, I keep it at 60, which is perfectly fine. So more than smooth enough. Okay, next up, let's talk about units. Units are extremely important. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're talking about using AutoCAD, the vast majority of people who are going to be using AutoCAD are creating plans for something that's going to exist in real life. And in real life, units are very important, be it feet for, a civil project, or, inches, or, millimeters for 3D printing, whatever, whatever it might be, right? So to get our units right, we're going to go ahead and type in units, and we're going to be presented with this menu here. So you're welcome to copy my my settings. I personally, I've used these settings for quite a long time, so I like them. In this series, we're going to be using these settings, so if you want to just copy them so that we can all be on the same page, that's great. Main thing is, if we hit this type drop down here, you're going to see we have a variety of different types of units. So I personally like to use decimal, and that what decimal means is, you can see as I'm sort of drawing this line, I have 3.2889 there for my current length, right? If I were to, for example, switch to architectural units, you can see now I'm sort of getting fractions of an inch instead of a decimal, right? And architectural units can be useful for a lot of things. Architectural or engineering units, I've used them before for 3D printing, for example. So very helpful, but for now we're going to be using decimals for our length, and we're also going to be using decimal degrees for our angle types. Some people might want to use degree minutes seconds for, again, like civil drafting, survey drafting, things of that nature, or radians for for who knows what. Down here, we also have our precision values. So I like to show 4 zeros on my precision. It's way overkill for the vast majority of applications. So you want to show like 2, that's probably fine, to the hundredths place. And then for my angles, generally to the tenths place is more than enough for what I do. Maybe the hundredths might be necessary sometimes. And then from there, we have this little clockwise box. So by default, AutoCAD counts degrees counterclockwise. So I'll just do a little example here. So if I were to rotate this box 45 degrees, you're going to see it goes counterclockwise. We can tell because of the direction that the line is pointing. So if I wanted this to go the other direction by default, I'm just going to Control Z to undo that. I would simply rotate it by negative 45 degrees. So by default, AutoCAD counts positive degrees as counterclockwise. And last but not least, this units to scale inserted content. So this is not super relevant right this second, but in general, it is better for us to all be on the same page here. So I'm going to use feet. And what that means is we want to keep in mind now that our decimal degrees are going to sort of have some context, right? So now 0.25 decimal, or I'm sorry, not decimal degrees, our decimal units are going to have some context. So 0.25 is now equal to 1/4 of a foot or 3 inches, right? 0.5 would be half of a foot, etc. Once you get a little more comfortable with that, a lot of that becomes personal preference or project specific. So if and when you need to use architectural units or radians for your degrees, those things will come up and you will know how to change them. Okay, cool. We're almost ready to get started. The last thing we need to do is we need to make sure that everybody is using the same workspace. So that when I refer to a command or I point something out on the ribbon, you're not looking around for it for ages because you weren't set up right. So we're going to come down here to this little cog, gear wheel guy, and we're going to hit this arrow. And I'm going to have more of these than you do, so don't panic if you're missing some of these. But the one that we care about is the drafting and annotation workspace. So some of you may not already have that, and if you don't, this might be a little long-winded, so go ahead and skip to this timestamp. Skip it. Otherwise, those of you who are still here, let's go ahead and get this added to our list. So in order to add it, we're going to go over here to this same cogwheel dropdown, and we're going to hit Customize. And over on the Properties section, we're going to double-click this file name and right-click Copy, or you could Control-C. And then we're going to look for this Transfer tab. So there's 2 tabs, Customize and Transfer. We're going to click Transfer. And on the rightmost side, right next to where the New File dropdown is, we're going to click the second button, which is this Open Customization File button. And mine opens right to it. Yours may not. If it doesn't, we're going to just click this navigation bar press Control V to paste in file path we copied. And then we're going to get rid of everything past the last slash and get rid of the last slash as well. Hit enter. And that should take you right to where you need to go. So now that we're in here, we want to click on acad.cuix. This is the AutoCAD's default customization file. So regardless of what toolset you downloaded, you should have ACAD CUIX. And we're going to hit open. And once we do, you can see over here on the right side again, we've got some additional options populated underneath the workspace tree. The one we're looking for is obviously drafting and annotation. So from here, you can simply click on this and drag it over to your active workspaces. So right underneath workspaces here, and let it go. Now, I'm gonna hit cancel. You guys don't need to. If you don't have it, it should just automatically populate. And then from there, go ahead and hit OK. And once you've hit OK, you should now have it added to your list. So we're going to click it. And just so you can sort of see what happens when you switch between workspaces. It's going to sort of move stuff around. Now, in this new workspace, you may not have your properties window open. You may not have your command line open. So we're going to open those back up and redock them. Okay, welcome back everybody who already had the drafting and annotation workspace set up. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated for those of you who didn't, but we should all be on the same page now. So, at long last, we can finally start learning to use AutoCAD. So the first command that we're going to cover is a really basic one, and it's the pan command. So we activate the pan command by pressing P on the keyboard and hitting the space bar. Like I said, P and space are, or I'm sorry, not P and space, enter and space are practically interchangeable in the vast majority of situations. And so now we can click and drag around our model space view. Now, I just sort of have this like big like abyss of a model space. So I'm going to draw a circle in here just for some reference, right? So CI for circle, specify the center point of my circle and the radius. Okay, and I'm going to just move this. You don't need to be following along that. But there we go. So we have our circle. And again, we're radius 20. So those of you with some experience in the software or experience in various other softwares, you might know that simply holding the middle mouse button will actually activate the pan command. And that'll allow you to pan around the drawing a lot easier. And I don't actually use that. So in my experience, I have found that changing the middle mouse button to use the snap menu is actually significantly faster. And pretty much everyone I know who is a top tier drafter uses this technique. It's one of the things that sort of sets them apart from their competition. So, like I said, when I press down the middle mouse button, I actually get this unique drop-down with a bunch of snapping options. You might have seen me use it very briefly earlier. These options are, they include, the end point of a line, the midpoint of a line, the center of a circle or an arc, quadrant of a circle, for example, is the one that we're going to talk about right now. So the nice thing about this is most of these options on this menu actually have a very intuitive key to activate them. So instead of having to come down here and pick quadrant from this list, I can simply press Q and it will activate a quadrant snap. Now, I didn't actually have a command active, so AutoCAD didn't really know what to do. But if, for example, I use L space to activate my line command, click the middle mouse button, and press Q, you'll now see that if I hover over any part of this quarter of the circle, I get this little diamond at the top that's going to have me snap to the quadrant of that circle. And once again, if I were to say want to draw to the rightmost quadrant of this circle, I can simply middle mouse button, press Q, hover over this quarter of the circle, anywhere on the quarter of the circle there, and click, and it will snap directly from to the point that I intended it to. In order to get out of that command, by the way, all I did was press escape. So that's one thing you're going to want to get in the habit of doing, is pressing the escape command to exit, the escape key to exit certain commands. I usually hit escape because some commands do require you to hit it twice. As we go around, I can simply Q middle mouse button Q around this whole circle and sort of create a little diamond on the inside. To further visualize how the snap works, I'm going to just very quickly create an array and show you sort of where the boundaries are for the quadrants of the circle. So don't worry about any of this. We will cover this at a later time. So as you can see here, if I use my line command again, and I do my quadrant snap, anywhere on this side of the line, all the way over to this line, will give me this quadrant of the circle. The second I cross over this line here to the other quadrant, it will give me this point on the circle, the middle of that quadrant. And again, likewise for the rest of the quadrants on the circle. Now this works the same for a line, for example. So as you can see here, this is obviously the middle point of our line. If I were to draw a new line and do the endpoint snap, which would just simply be middle mouse button and then E for endpoint, anywhere I hover on this half of the line will pop up with this snap point for the end of the line. The second I cross the halfway mark, now this line also has an endpoint, right? So just ignore that for now. But as soon as I cross this halfway mark, you're going to see it wants to go to the other end of the line, right? And likewise for the midpoint. Now there's only one midpoint on this line, right? But it's going to give me that little triangle snap right there. And if I were to hover over the other line we made, you're going to see it wants to snap to that midpoint. One key thing to keep in mind about this is, again, I don't even need to be anywhere near the endpoint of this line with my cursor, with my crosshair, to snap to the endpoint of the line. So I can click all the way over here as long as I have my endpoint snap active, and I can get a line right at the endpoint of that line. Same thing with this. See Daisy. Careful there. Endpoint, turn ortho mode off, endpoint, endpoint. Just like that. And to further sort of, I guess, expound upon that point, if I were to turn on, let's say, my O-snaps, and I were to turn all of these guys on and hit OK, now if I'm to use my line command, you're going to see when I hover over this line, I'm going to get a lot of information very quickly. So if I hover over this portion of the line, I'm going to have this sort of hourglass, which is the nearest snap. If I get close to the endpoint, it's going to give me the endpoint snap. If I get close to the midpoint, it's going to give me the midpoint snap. And I'm going to have nearest the whole way there until I get to the other endpoint. Likewise for the circle. I'll have nearest. I'll also get a center snap. I'll get a quadrant snap. I'll get midpoints and endpoints on each of these lines. And you can see that it's very easy, to sort of make a mistake, right? If I were to just sort of be working very quickly and go, oh, I want the endpoint, and I click here, assuming that the endpoint snap is going to activate. Well, unfortunately it didn't, and now my line is in the wrong place, starting from the wrong place, right? So that's one of the key reasons that I like to keep my OSNAPs off. For some reason, your OSNAP menu doesn't pop up. You can just type in OSNAP. And then I just clear them all and hit OK. So once again, with them off, I can completely control exactly where that line is snapping to. Okay, so now that I've sort of sung the virtues of turning off your OSNAPs and activating your middle mouse button snap menu, how do you actually do it? So I'm going to simply select these and erase them with ESpace, by the way, just to get rid of them. So to disable the pan on your middle mouse button and add our snapping menu, we're going to change something called a system variable. We'll talk more about system variables some other time, but for now, in order to change it, all we do is we simply type M button pan. And I think we can just type like M button, it'll pop up. But M button pan. We're going to hit spacebar. And the default value for this is 1. We're going to simply change it to 0. Press enter. And now, when we hit our middle mouse button, our pan is gone. So you don't need to be worried about not being able to navigate, right? I'm going to redraw our circle back in here so you have some reference, because we learned the pan command, right? P space. So we can pan around. But to be perfectly honest, I pan very infrequently. And the main way that I actually navigate my AutoCAD drawings is by zooming. So in AutoCAD by default, you will zoom to your cursor and zoom away from your cursor. So what that means is, if I wanted to go left, I would simply put my cursor on the right side of my screen and zoom out. And now the left side of my screen, or the left side of my model space, becomes more visible to me. And if I wanted to center this circle a little bit better, I could zoom out from over here on the left and then zoom in. Now, this is a little counterintuitive and it takes a little bit of practice, but once you get this down, you will navigate drawings much more quickly than someone who is constantly just panning around looking for the next thing. And you also get a much better sort of overview of whatever you're doing, especially if it's a larger scale project. But we don't have to stop there. We can actually combine pan and zoom to sort of just, to totally master navigation in AutoCAD, right? So if we do P space, we can zoom with the pan command active and then drag around. So, if I want to zoom in on something, I totally can. I can zoom, pan to my heart's content, get everything exactly where I want, right? Now, let's say you zoom too far and sort of lose your way. Well, the easiest way to find your way back to your drawing inside of model space, instead of going, oh, I think I was over here somewhere in the abyss, you type Z space and then E space. And what that does, it's called zoom extents. And you're simply invoking the zoom command with Z. And then you're invoking this extents subroutine inside of the zoom command. And that will just simply zoom you to the extents of your drawing, which, you know, if I had something out here, and then something down here as well, and I did ZE, it's going to basically fill up my screen with as much of the drawing as it can. Since I just want the circle, I'm going to delete the rest of those, and then when I zoom extents, it will take me straight back to my circle. Okay, so far this video has been a lot of setup, so let's go over some of these draw pane commands over here. And, you know, hopefully we can come away with some more practical skills and actually get a feel for how to create entities inside of AutoCAD. So first off, we have the line and polyline commands, and I want to just be clear here. While I'm highlighting these on the ribbon so that you can sort of have a visual of them, almost never, and there are some exceptions, but almost never will I actually come up here and click on a ribbon button, because it is, in a professional environment, extraordinarily slow. No one does it. Well, nobody good does it. I'll say that. For most of what you do, you want to be using the hotkeys. And the nice thing about the hotkeys is, one, they're incredibly intuitive most of the time, right? The command for line is L, right? Polyline would be PL, right? So they're usually very intuitive. The other nice thing about them is, for the ones that aren't intuitive, or the ones you feel like you don't use super frequently, you can totally change those as well. And we're not going to go over how to edit an alias file here, because it is a little bit complicated. It probably deserves its own video. But just keep in mind, you can really make AutoCAD work for you. Some other things to sort of keep in mind as well. Your posture is not the right word, but I guess your technique when using AutoCAD. I primarily keep my left hand on the keyboard at all times, and I keep my right hand on my mouse as much as I can. Pretty much the only time that I take my right hand off of my mouse is to use the 10 key pad to input values for various reasons. Otherwise, my pinky, sometimes my ring finger, is resting on the escape key, and the rest of my hand is sort of free to hit hotkeys on the keyboard as need be. So something you want to get used to is typing, not typing specifically, but hitting these hotkeys with just your left hand as much as possible. That will dramatically increase your speed. So moving on from that, as I was saying with the line and polyline commands, at first glance they seem really similar, right? And for our purposes here, they do differ dramatically, but for our purposes here, the main distinction between line and polyline is that when I draw a line using L space, and I specify all these different points, I hit escape to exit my command. If I click anywhere on this line, you're going to see that each of my points is, or each of my lines is separate from one another, right? Even though these lines might share a vertex, these are actually individual entities. And those vertices just happen to be in the same place at that time. With a polyline, however, you might have guessed, if I draw a polyline and I highlight any portion of my polyline or click on it, you're going to see that all of the points are shared on a polyline. And for our purposes here today, that's going to be the main distinction between a line and a polyline, the line command and a polyline command. Now, you want to probably get in the habit, depending on what your work scenario is, you want to probably get in the habit of using polyline as much as possible, because they're just generally more useful. And I'm not going to get into the minutia of line versus polyline here, but for the most part, you want to be using polylines. So one other key function that you have with a polyline is, if I invoke my polyline command, sorry, sometimes I go a little fast. If I invoke my polyline command, with PL space, and I pick a starting point, you're going to see down here on my command line, I actually have a variety of different subroutines, right? Now, we have the undo, which was also inside of our line command, but the main one that we're going to focus on right now is the arc command. So Polyline has a built-in subroutine that will create a tangential arc at the endpoint of a line, which is extraordinarily helpful. Now, for those of us who don't remember what tangency is, they don't remember back to high school geometry, a line of tangency is simply a line that touches a circle at only one point on the line and one point on the circle. So, for example, I'm going to use the G tangent snap here. I can create a tangent line, and you can sort of see what I mean, how the line only touches the circle at one point. And if I were to zoom in here real far in, which I can't even find it now, you would see that it only touches at one point, right? So that's helpful because when it comes to tangency, that's actually the way that you create very smooth arcs, right? So sort of illustrate that point. You can see that now it's sort of hard to, I mean, you can see it obviously where the turn happens, but it's sort of hard to see where this line ends and our arc begins. And even harder still if I were to get rid of some of this. Now it sort of just looks like one continuous entity. So the benefit of the polyline arc is that does this, it does that for us automatically. So if I were to make my line, let's say just here at this angle, and I can either click, but we're good drafters, right? We want to be fast. So instead of clicking, I'm going to hit A space. So A space. And now you can see that I'm creating a tangent arc at the end of this line basically seamlessly. I don't have to worry about doing any kind of additional commands to add one on there. So I can click anywhere and it'll create a tangent arc. Now you can see that it's already asking me to sort of create another tangent arc on top of that. So if I don't ever switch back to the line command by pressing L space inside of here, right, in our polyline subroutine, I'll keep making arcs and they'll all be tangent to the last arc that came before it. And they look cool. Now, once I do eventually reinvoke my line command, it's a little tricky. I'm not sure if there's a better way to do this, but I kind of gotta give it a good little laser eyeball here to get it in, and honestly, not my best work there to get that extended. But there are more complicated ways to sort of make that look a little bit better. But for now, yeah. So that's sort of what the arc subroutine inside our polyline command does. So once again, activate my polyline command with PL space, click, A for arc, and now I'm creating an arc, L space for line, and now I'm creating a line off of that arc. So good to practice that for sure. Okay, the last command we're going to cover today, at the very least, since it's already sort of a long video, is the circle command. So the default hotkey for the circle command is C. I typically change my hotkey for circle to CI, since I tend to not use circles very frequently, sort of the nature of what I use AutoCAD for. And I find that the copy command, the AutoCAD copy command, which by default is CO, I use much more frequently. So, but I'll use, CI for now because that's how mine is set up, but you could just use C. So by default, when we want to create a circle, we're simply going to invoke the command, and it's going to, once again, if we look down here at our command line, we can see that it's telling us exactly what to do, right? It says specify the center point for the circle. And we're going to come back to our subroutines in a little bit. But specify the center point for the circle. So I can click in space somewhere, and now you can see around that point where I clicked, a circle is being generated, right? And it's asking us to give a specific radius. So I'm going to give radius 20. And for those of you who don't remember, radius is simply half of the diameter. The diameter is simply the line, or the length of the line that goes from one extreme of the circle to the other. I mean, a straight line in the circle, basically. So the relationship would be, diameter is 2 times the radius, right? Radius is half the diameter, because the radius is simply the distance from the circle, the center point, to the edge of the circle. You might have noticed when we did that circle command, we had the option down here to input the diameter. So something like this can be useful if you got to put in an 11-inch pipe, and that's the diameter that you have for the pipe, or 1 1/4-inch borehole for a drill press, for example, right? You go diameter, 1.25 for 1 1/4 inch. And if we were working in inches, and we're working in feet, so don't quote me on this, but but the point is, right, you can enter the diameter there and get the exact diameter instead of the radius if the information you're being given is in diameter and not in radius, and you don't feel like doing any math, which I don't blame you for. So the next most common circle, actually, really quickly, so I said we won't really click on the ribbon, and we won't, but for the sake of sort of showing visually what we're talking about. So we just covered the circle center radius command and the circle center diameter command, and that was all within that same circle command. The next most common type of circle is going to be this 2-point circle, and so we'll talk about that one next, right? Another little handy thing about the newer versions of AutoCAD, if you do hover over for a while, you'll actually usually get a little diagram of what the command does, which can be very effective in helping you sort of learn these commands on your own. But a 2-point circle, so we're going to do that by invoking our circle command again. For me, again, it's CI. And instead of picking a center point, we're actually going to type in 2P, for 2-point. You can see we have 3P, 2P, and TTR for tangent radius. We're going to do 2P. And now, again, if we read, we're going to specify the first endpoint of the circle's diameter. So that might not make a lot of sense on first read, but as soon as we click, it'll make a lot more sense. So I'm just going to click somewhere in space. And now you can see I'm sort of defining the line that will define the circle. So this will not only determine the circle's diameter, but it'll also determine the circle's, relative rotation. Might be a good way to say that. And I can apply ortho mode to this as well. So if I press F8, you can see I make a straight line this way. If I go to the right, or if I go up, down, left, etc. Right? So this can actually be really helpful for a couple of reasons. Let's say you had 2 parallel lines, didn't know the distance of, and you needed to create a circle between them. Well, really easy way to do that is if we do our circle command, and we do our 2P, and we snap to the midpoint of both of these lines. Let's say that's where we needed the circle between. And now I have a circle that is tangent to both of these lines that we've created, right? This can also be really helpful if we had, for example, something like this. And we need a circle between these 2 points, right? Now we could easily just measure this and go, okay, this is 39.4679, and I could find the exact center of this by doing a specific snap, etc., etc. But really easy to just activate our circle command, 2p, endpoint, bada bing, bada boom, we have a circle there. So 2p circle, that's just two applications for a variety of potential different applications that you could want to use a circle for. There's a million different reasons, right? But the main part of this is to sort of get you thinking about, okay, what can I use these additional sort of subroutines within the commands to accomplish, right? So yeah, with that, that'll sort of bring us to a close here. This is the first video that I'm making as an AutoCAD tutorial, so I'd appreciate any feedback. I'm sure there will be questions and things I forgot to cover or problems with the setup. Leave them in the comments and I will do my best to get them answered either text reply or in a potential future video. The next time that I make one of these, I want to cover the rest of what's up here in the draw pane. And then I want to cover the rest of, well, maybe not all of, but certainly some of the modified pane as well. And that, with those two panes combined, that is a good amount of probably 60% of what's done on a daily basis for drafting. The rest of it will be like text, dimensions, layer property controls, setting up layers, things of that nature, and then talking more about this properties menu. And then, how to save files and sort of additional other stuff, right? But the point is, you get through draw and modify, and that's the vast majority of what you're going to be doing. But yeah, like I said, next time we'll cover the rest of that. And if you like the tutorial, please remember to like it. And if you want to be updated, when I release, new videos, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And thanks again for watching.